Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Congresswoman Paulina Luna. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me back on.
Of course, we are so excited to have you back on again, and we have a wide-ranging conversation today. So let's jump right into it. As you know, last night on Tuesday, the House voted to impeach DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. What's your reaction?
You know, I absolutely have been an advocate for his impeachment, I think, since day one. And I really wanted to use my social media to inform the public on what was happening, because after that first vote that was unsuccessful, I think people were just really disgruntled and disenfranchised with really politics in general, because we know so many people have been impacted by this open border. But I just want to be really transparent. You know, Alejandro Mayorkas did lie to Congress. But even, I think, more egregiously, he's really been, I think, part of the problem in what's happening at our southern border. This is not just a partisan thing, right? It's not just impacting Democrats or Republicans. This is impacting everyone around the country. So many people, from celebrities to your average Joe, have been impacted by fentanyl killing members in their family. So it was long overdue. But again, this is, I think, just the start. What we're seeing right now is this administration is really undermining the laws that we have on the books for illegal immigration in order to combat it. So we look forward to November of this year when we get a change of leadership.
Obviously, I don't need to underscore the gravity of this historic move. He's the second cabinet secretary to ever be impeached, the first one since the 1800s. So you obviously are not satisfied with his performance. But what is the impeachable offense here?
Well, first of all, again, like I had stated earlier, he had lied to Congress, but also to remember he wasn't enforcing the laws. And what he's done is really undermined the faith of the American people. He was elected to his position in order to protect our citizens and keep our country safe. And he's been doing everything that he can in order to undermine that. And remember, he was caught on a hot mic actually talking about how bad it was at the border. And then he turned around to the press and really lied to the American people. You know, his decisions as secretary, I think any good leader will tell you that even if you realize, you know, for example, someone like Biden might be wrong about something, you should counsel and then use your position to do right by the American people. And he hasn't done that. And so that's unfortunately a problem that we're facing up here in Washington. Is politics has become so partisan to the fact of, I think, people are willing to sacrifice the American people in order for their own party and agenda.
He was appointed, he was carrying out the Biden administration policy. So Democrats and some Republicans would push back on your argument and say this is just a policy dispute. What rises to that high crime and misdemeanor? And what's your response to that?
I would say that for every family member that's been impacted and lost a loved one due to fentanyl, for all the women and children that have been trafficked at the border, for all of the people caught on the terrorist watch list, and for the amount of military age males that are coming here, not from South America, not from Mexico, but from places like Africa, people on the known terrorist watch list, people, places like China. You know, that's not just a policy issue. That's a national security issue. And he is guilty of really hurting the American people.
Since former President Trump's first impeachment back in 2019, both parties have accused the other of using impeachment as a partisan tactic. I want to read you a quote from Speaker Mike Johnson 4 years ago. He said this, quote, "The founding fathers, the founders of this country, warned against single-party impeachments," and, quote, "they said it would be bitterly divisive, perhaps irreparably divisive for the country." What do you make of that as we sit here 4 years later on another party line impeachment vote?
I think it's one of, you know, when I go and explain really what's been happening up here, I think, you know, you had impeachment 1 and 2 against President Trump, really starting from the day that he even swore into office. And we found out now 4 years later that everything, the whole allegations of Russia collusion was false. That came out in the Durham report. Obviously, that's why I censured Adam Schiff. And you saw people using that as a tool to make it partisan. Unfortunately, everything that they have accused Republicans and President Trump of, they were actually guilty of doing. You know, one of my committee assignments is on Congressional House oversight. And so I've been privy to see some of the information and evidence in regards to what this administration and people tied to this administration have not only hid from the American people, but what they've been guilty of doing. And unfortunately, you know, we have members on both sides that have been using this position to personally enrich themselves. And it's really egregious that they were able to push a lie and not be held accountable in regards to the allegation that President Trump was somehow working with a foreign government. Today an article came out in regards to the amount of intelligence community officials, as well as agencies known as the Five Eyes around the world, that were actually meeting with and coordinating with Obama and the Clintons to surveillance Trump associates, 26 in total. And so we know that politics is dirty, but I think the new evolution in media, to include social media, these YouTube channels, it's allowed the American people to share the facts unfiltered.
As you know, a handful of your Republican colleagues did vote against the impeachment attempt, one of them being Congressman Ken Buck. He did say this after the vote. Quote, "The first impeachment of Donald Trump was a bad impeachment, and we've got to stop this in this body or we are going to further lose our credibility with the American people." What do you make of his comment there? Do you think that this impeachment vote, which some have deemed performative, is going to lose credibility with the American people, further divide the country?
I don't think so. And I have, respect for my colleague from Colorado, but, I disagree with him on this, mainly because, again, we've sat on oversight. I've been down to the border 3 times. I've talked to so many people, and you're having places like New York, places like even Austin, Texas, very much so impacted by these policies, to the point of where even these Democrat-run cities, remember what happened at Martha's Vineyard, they actually didn't want illegals in their community and they sent them out of their town. So I think what you're seeing right now is, some members are getting out of office. And I think that it's gotten to a point where, it's not going to ever go back to the way that it was prior to President Trump being in office, to where, it's a good old boy club up here. I think things are changing. And I think that the more members that you have elected to office that are not from the establishment party, I think that you're going to see a continued push for this change. I'll end with this. I find it really egregious that when you look at the media, you look at pictures of these illegals coming here, that you'll constantly see photos of Hispanic women and children. They're actually lying to you. They're not showing you the actual people that are coming here that are not Hispanic. But the reason why they're doing that is because starting in 2016 and now in 2020, the largest voting minority in the country are Hispanic Americans, specifically of Mexican descent. You saw the Democrat Party largely run on an open border platform moving into 2020. Remember, Joe Biden did the Despacito song. You saw Joe Biden call us breakfast tacos. It might sound funny in theory, but it's not. They were actually trying to largely target the Hispanic voting demographic because, again, it's about control of the greatest superpower in the world, and that's the United States. So what we're seeing is this propaganda campaign holding on for dear life, and candidates like myself, members like myself, are not going to allow them to exploit the Hispanic American demographic like that.
I am curious, and I feel grateful every day I'm able to talk to different members of Congress from both sides of the aisle, and they visited the border, they've shared their experience. You said that you were at the southern border 3 times. Because you saw firsthand what was there, why do you think, or how does impeaching Secretary Mayorkas make this country safer?
I think it's because of the fact that Mayorkas ultimately is in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, right? He's the secretary. He's ultimately the say-so on authority and policy that's enforced. And he did not do the right thing. The right thing, even if he did not agree with Biden, was to stand up to him and enforce the policies to protect Americans. When I went down there, and remember, I got involved in politics because I was volunteering with a counter-trafficking organization. When I went down there, I can tell you that not only were we actually on a tribal reservation that was actually working with cartels to run drugs across the border, but there's literally no physical barrier. I could jump over a piece of barbed wire that maybe came up to, I want to say, my knee. And it's a complete area where people can go through, and then you can actually see the traffic. So there's kids stuff, there's clothing. It's really dangerous. And a number of these migrants are actually killed in the process, whether or not they're coming in through a season where it's really dry or whether or not it's more nefarious. But, this is not a joke. And it angers me as someone that is Hispanic American to see the way that they treat Americans like we're stupid, we don't understand. They do a lot of the race-baiting politics. But not even just that, we have every tool and the ability as members of Congress to enforce this. And I think some members are afraid of taking those hard position stands because they're concerned about their reelection. But that's part of the problem, is that will not allow you to make the correct decisions. The correct decisions is to shut it down and make sure that we're enabling legal immigration, because when you don't, people are hurt on both sides.
How do we make the border more safe, though? Because I've talked to, like I said, members from both sides of the aisle. Everyone I've talked to about the border, Democrats and Republicans alike, have said there is a crisis at the southern border. How do we fix this? Because as you know, a bipartisan border bill failed in the Senate. So what is the fix here?
Well, the bipartisan border bill failed in the Senate because it wasn't actually in the best interest of the American people from a lot of the nonsense that they stuck in there. So we actually, as Republicans in the House, voted on H.R. 2 that went up to the Senate, and it sat on Chuck Schumer's desk and some of these more open borders Republicans. And I actually had a conversation with a very well-known Republican senator that told me to my face that they would never give the American people or Congress a border security bill unless we had amnesty in it. And as you know, many Americans, to include my family that came here legally, find it offensive to have people that are basically cutting the line, not actually going through the health screening process, not going through the actual financials, or some of the American civics courses that we ask these people to take before they become American citizens. And so I think the number one fix, if I had a magic wand and I could fix it tomorrow, is you cannot allow in any way, shape, or form people to come here illegally, because when you do, it bogs down the courts that are trying to help people that are doing it the right way. And also, again, it incentivizes bad people to exploit the innocent. So that's the first thing. The second thing would be physical barriers, because right now in all three sectors that I went to, they were open. I could basically walk over into Mexico if I wanted. And when I tell you I was in a position where we were basically being observed by coyotes and cartel on the other side, it's an uncomfortable position. And I say that as a member of Congress. And then the third thing would be is that if you really, really want to help Border Patrol do their job, they need more bodies and more funding. And so ordering Border Patrol, for example, to go cut wire in Texas not only undermines the authority that Texas has as a state, but it also incentivizes illegal immigration. So you can't have people and policymakers that are encouraging that.
The Union for the Border Patrol Agents did endorse that bipartisan bill. They didn't call it perfect, but they called it, quote, a step in the right direction and is far better than the current status quo. So do you think we can see or expect to see any movement on any border legislation before the election?
Yeah, we'll have movement on border legislation, but we're not going to give them amnesty, and that's what they're pushing for. And I feel really bad for the guys in Border Patrol, because the ones that I've talked to, and especially the higher up that you get into those organizations, it does get political. So they're not going to sit there and tell you that, you know, these people are basically being threatened with their jobs and their pensions if they come out and speak against the either secretary and or President Biden. But what I can tell you is, remember, it's an important fact that the media doesn't like to cover, is that a majority of Border Patrol agents are actually Hispanic. And so it's not just, you know, racist people down there deporting people that want to come here. It's people that care about these communities, that are sometimes from these communities on the other side of the border, and understand what happens when it's not done the correct way.
Congresswoman, before we change topics here, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, and I'm assuming it was a private conversation, but would you be willing to name that top senator who said that without amnesty, any legislation's a non-starter?
I can't name the senator because, again, it was a private conversation. But what I can tell you is this is a very, very well-known Republican senator. And to put it in perspective, you have people that have been up here for a really long time. And I think that they think that they're in power, but it's really the American people. So I think maybe if we continue to get pushback, I'd be willing to say who it was. But as of right now, I'm going to respect that anonymity.
Well, Congresswoman, we will move on, and hopefully in further conversations you can divulge. But the Senate passed a $95 billion foreign aid bill in a bipartisan vote on Tuesday. So before I get your reaction to this, I would like to break down what was in that package. Approximately $60 billion to Ukraine, $14.1 billion to Israel, $9.2 billion in humanitarian aid for Gaza, and over $8 billion to Taiwan. Is this a package that you would support?
Absolutely not. In fact, not only would I not support it, pigs would have to fly and hell would have to freeze over before I support that aid package. What I can tell you is, one, it's egregious to fund both sides of what's happening in Israel, and that's exactly what this bill would do. First of all, I support giving aid to our allies. However, when you're saying that you want to give humanitarian aid to Gaza or the Palestinian Authority, people have to realize that Hamas is a political party within the Palestinian Authority. So you're essentially funding both sides of that war. Secondly, what you have happening in Ukraine, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but Ukraine actually has a list of lawmakers. Senator Ron Paul's on it. as well as some of my former colleagues that are people that they are labeling as Russian propagandists because they don't want to support what's happening in Ukraine. I just want to be clear with the American people. I traveled to Poland and I met with the Ukrainian parliament, met with the speaker, and what they're trying to do after this war is over is all the equipment, all the tanks that we're giving them, they want to create a private mercenary army. It's similar to the Wagner Group, which is not a good thing. So I don't think that we should be funding that, one. Two, we're funding their pensions. And three, I mean, why are we not making calls for peace right now? We're the United States, and yet we're supposed to continuously fund this. This is ridiculous. So I respect Speaker Johnson. I'm sure that you've seen his statements. He's not going to be bringing this to a vote on the floor. So the Senate can take a hike. We're not doing that.
I talked to one of your colleagues, Congressman Tim Burchett, last week, and he said he does not support funding for Ukraine, full stop. You did tweet last night, pigs will fly before I vote to send more American money to Ukraine. I do now want to go to the flip side. Some Republicans and Democrats alike have said if we don't continue to support Ukraine financially, Russia could steamroll them, start World War III. What's your reaction to that?
I think that they're fear-mongering. I think that I've been there and some of them haven't. I can also tell you that it's interesting that they don't bring up the fact that Ukraine's not a NATO ally and actually denied joining NATO when they had the opportunity. Also, no one talks about Chernobyl, but you know what? You know who manages that? Russia does. In fact, Ukraine was a part of Russia. So I think this idea that somehow if you don't support that you are a Russia propagandist. Look, I only care about fighting for the constituents in Pinellas County. And what I can tell you is those constituents are not paying for their tax dollars to go to pensions in Ukraine. And that's what's exactly happening with this funding. And I'm frankly sick of people making calls to, to go fund Ukraine, yet they don't have family in the military. They've never served. And somehow if you don't send this funding, then we're going to have to send our sons and daughters to die in Ukraine. I don't think so. That's actually why I pushed the Schumer Act. And, as you saw, that was leaked. But I think that members of Congress and Senate that advocate for that should be the first ones fighting on the front lines.
Can you talk a little bit about the Schumer Act for us?
Yeah, of course. So it was something that I came up with. I got really frustrated after seeing an interview that Schumer had, actually, I think it was on CNN, where he spoke about if you do not essentially want to fund the money for Ukraine, that you're essentially going to see American troops basically serving overseas to fight Russia. That's a disgusting opinion to have. And also Schumer doesn't have any skin in the game. It's not his son. It's not his daughter going over there. So I think that if you're going to do that, you should put your money where your mouth is. Interestingly enough, that was leaked. It wasn't even introduced yet, and someone in the House of Representatives leaked that to the Daily Mail, but I make no apologies for it, and I think it should be passed.
On a similar line, President Biden said that opposing this bill, this funding, would be, quote, playing into Putin's hands. What's your message to President Biden then? Because you do oppose that.
Yeah, President Biden didn't have any opposition when his family received money from a Ukrainian oligarch in Burisma. So if that somehow makes me a Russian asset, I would turn around and say, well, he's the one that's accepting money from Ukraine and from, frankly, Russian oligarchs and their wives. And so when you have that type of information going out there, you have him really using his megaphone in order to throw off the American people because he doesn't have any accountability for what's happening with the money that we are sending to Ukraine. Not only is it insulting, but it's a lie.
And I did talk to one of your colleagues, Congresswoman Victoria Spartz. She is a Ukrainian American. She said she would support funding for Ukraine, but with stipulations. Like, she wants a list of where that money's going. You wouldn't even support that, is what you're saying, right?
Correct.
Okay. And I do now want to pivot and move on to comments former President Donald Trump made over the weekend. He said he would encourage Russia to, quote, do whatever the hell they want if NATO members didn't pay more. This got a lot of criticism. What's your reaction to his comments?
President Trump knows that he has a big megaphone, and he also knows that he was respected not only by world leaders as our NATO allies, but also to our adversaries. And what I will say is that I don't believe that this would have happened if President Trump was in office. I don't think that Hamas would have attacked Israel, and I don't think that China would be looking at Taiwan. So there's something to be said about weak leadership and how our adversaries will hear what happens in the United States. But what I will also say is that NATO should pay their fair share into what's happening currently, because right now we are at a deficit and the American people are literally hemorrhaging money because some of these people don't want to pay up. And then it's egregious that you have the notion that we should somehow be supporting and funding Ukraine when they don't pay our taxes. They didn't want to join NATO, and yet all of a sudden we're supposed to be joining their war. I don't think so.
The NATO Security General reportedly said this about Donald Trump's comments, quote, "Any suggestion that allies will not defend each other undermines all of our security, including that of the U.S., and puts American and European soldiers at increased risk." Do you agree? Do you think former President Trump's comments put both us, our security, our troops at risk?
No, and I think that guy will be singing a different tune once President Trump is reelected. And I will also say this, to say that if you don't support Ukraine, that you're somehow putting American troops at risk and NATO troops. Well, I would say that they're not paying their fair share, and that actually puts their own troops at risk because they're not able to afford equipment. So again, it's not the United States' position to continue to fund these foreign wars, nor is it our position to really give massive amounts of cash to these countries that don't want to put up the same amount.
Congresswoman, I appreciate your comments. We do have one more subject to tackle, if you don't mind.
Of course.
And that is last week, the special counsel's report on its investigation of President Biden's handling of classified documents dropped, and it found that that President Biden, quote, willfully kept classified materials, but it's not charging him. What do you make of the news here?
It's a double standard. In fact, I know that Jim Jordan, Chairman Comer, who's my chairman in House Oversight, as well as Jason, the chairman of Ways and Means, have actually requested the transcribed interview of that between the archives and Biden. But what I can tell you is I think the American people know after reading that, something that we've all suspected. I'm not even trying to be funny. It is very alarming and concerning that there is a cognitive issue with this president. I think the fact that he doesn't do open press conferences, as many as he should be doing, the fact that it seems like he has handlers and that he's just simply not as an accessible president as our previous predecessors, whether they're Democrat or Republican, is something that we should be alarmed about. And frankly, if you have someone that is being basically labeled in the report as someone who's suffering from these issues, how do you expect this person to represent us on the world stage? And also remember, we have nuclear capability. This guy, I don't even think sometimes knows where he's at. And so it's something that, you know, many members, of which I support as well, need to consider the 25th Amendment.
Let's talk about that. Would you invoke the 25th Amendment? Because one of your colleagues also brought that up.
To my knowledge, that actually has to be done by the cabinet. But I think that we're at a point with this president where it's very clear that he has some cognitive issue. Again, I'm not a doctor, but based on the chatter that I've picked up, based on the interviews, and based on the chatter from some of the Democrats as well, he's not there.
What is this indicating to the international community here? Because both former President Donald Trump, current President Joe Biden had some issues here handling documents. Obviously, the report described President Biden as a, quote, elderly man with a poor memory. Do you think that either Trump or Biden's handling of classified documents could impact our relationship with allies or foreign powers?
Based on the two stories and how they're different here, you had Biden that literally had his classified documents in his garage in a home in Delaware, which, by the way, Hunter Biden was, renting for a long period of time. And then you had President Trump's, of which we know that there was information leaked in regards to photo, which never happens unless it's a partisan hit job. And then also, too, within hours of the raid at Mar-a-Lago, you saw websites up on the National Archives basically dedicated to President Trump, and then none in regards to Biden. But it hasn't only been them that have had classified information. It's been Obama. It's been, I believe, Clinton, Bush as well. And so remember, presidents have the authority to declassify information once they leave office. I think that just like so many of these other investigations into President Trump, that this is a political hit job. I think that the evidence will speak for itself, and the fact that they are trying to still prosecute President Trump for this, when you literally had boxes in a garage in Delaware from Biden, it's a gross double standard. But I think that's exactly why President Trump is polling so high and projected to win the next election.
The report did differentiate Biden and Trump's mishandling of the classified documents. We did see those photos of the boxes of documents in a Mar-a-Lago bathroom, and it said Trump acted in an opposite manner to Biden and, quote, not only refused to return the documents for months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then lie about it. Do you think both of these are equal? Clearly you don't, but talk about that a little bit for us.
Yeah, what I can tell you, and this is something that hasn't been, I think, shared in a private setting, so I'd be comfortable addressing it, is that Trump's attorneys were in full cooperation. And then all of a sudden you saw this raid. And then all of a sudden from that raid, you saw pictures leaked by the FBI, the same FBI, mind you, that has been caught hiding and covering for the Biden, his family, and the administration, 2 members of Congress in an effort to, I think, throw off our investigations. So do I believe that? No, based on the evidence. I know people probably watching us are saying, oh, she's a Republican. Of course, she's going to try to run cover. No, I'm just being honest with you guys. I just don't see it there. I think that what they're doing to this president is really gross. We see cases in Georgia. We see cases in Florida of political appointees that are going after President Trump. We know that they weaponize the intelligence community against him. They hate him. They hate anyone that stands with him. But that's exactly why he's going to win in 2024 this year.
So are you saying that the Her report is lying when it said Trump was obstructing justice here?
I think that they take things grossly out of context, yes.
Congresswoman...
It wouldn't be, sorry, I'll say this.
Okay.
It wouldn't be the first time in politics that people are lying. Just remember that.
Congresswoman Luna, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for the long conversation. You are welcome back anytime.
Thank you.